Resident Evil 0.
Hi guys, it's Tom from Digital Foundry.
And it's Richard here.
And we thought we'd try something a little different this time and do a live sort of comparison of two sides of the same game. So in this case we've got Resident Evil 0 played on the PS4 Remaster versus the GameCube version running on the Wii. This follows after the Resident Evil remake that came out last year, I believe.
Yeah, you took a look at that back then, and what are the major highlights of the remastered version versus the original?
So, well, back then it had a couple of interesting things. They really wanted to preserve they wanted to cater towards people who didn't want a complete overhaul, if that makes sense. They kind of wanted to preserve it as much as possible while tweaking it to the kind of current gen standard. So they took the original pre-rendered assets, like the backdrops, and did their best to present them in 1080p and widescreen.
Same approach here then, or is it something different? Or
it is the same approach. The source material is still from that GameCube release, but they have touched up the backdrops as best they can, and they've done a whole bunch of stuff. There's the 16:9 presentation, obviously.
Okay.
To do that, they basically got to work with a 4:3 aspect ratio.
Right, so they've still got the original assets which were originally rendered at 4:3.
Yeah.
And what have they done to make it 16:9 then?
Well, it's a twofold answer really. For example, the GameCube version actually had 16:9 FMVs, but they had them bordered.
Right.
You can see it's actually, they can use that asset and just have it fill the screen on the PS4 version, which is widescreen.
Okay.
For the game itself, when you're playing the game, they have the 4:3 asset, which is then cropped top and bottom. But as you move down the screen, you basically get a panning effect, so the camera will move up and down the 4:3 asset.
So the assets are basically pan and scanned almost.
Yep, that's it.
As you move around the play area, there's a sort of subtle scrolling effect.
Yep, wherever your character moves, it
scrolls. And that
scrolls.
scrolling effect wasn't in the original version.
No, it's
Right.
and
Okay.
in fact you can see how it was in the original version, because they have for purists they have the 4:3 mode still there.
Oh, okay, so that's still in there then. That's good.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So the other thing they added was, just like the Resident Evil remake last year, new controller method called the alternative controller scheme. Obviously Resident Evil's famous for its tank controls.
Yeah, and that's what you're using here.
Yeah, they had to use the tank to match the original Wii version. Obviously it didn't have the alternative, but this alternative mode follows a more modern logic for movement. Wherever you press the analog stick, you'll move towards that direction.
Mm-hmm.
It's much simpler, and some might say a bit easier.
So just to clarify here, you're using our dual system control method to produce this footage. So we're essentially running the original version of the game simultaneously with the PS4 remaster, and we're mirroring controls out to both versions as best as we can.
Yep.
And does the scrolling actually have any impact on that? So do we actually get a desync in controls from the scrolling or not?
No, not really. I had to work very hard to get these two sides of the game to sync up. As you see here, it's all a bit smoke and mirrors to make this work, but it does demonstrate some interesting things. They've got a few other things. They've got the 5.1 surround sound in this one as well.
Mm-hmm.
But there's some visual upgrades too.
Well, it's what sort of strikes me immediately is that the lighting seems to have been radically overhauled compared to the original.
Yeah, that's right. There's a limited range for them to work with. They can only really play with the lighting where there's geometric elements.
Okay.
For the background assets, obviously they can tweak the colour, they can colour adjust, which they have done. It gives the PS4 version a more sort of richer look. But as far as the lighting is concerned, it mainly affects the character models, as you can see on the faces of characters there.
But if you look at like the bloom effects coming off the sort of density of light coming off the lamps there, they seem to be considerably stronger on the PS4 compared to the original.
Yeah, this is one thing they can add in post. Pretty much gives each area a bit of depth, and it plays against the character models. These light points are actually dynamic. But
right, yeah, you can see there on the character models that there is actually shading on the face from the light source, where there doesn't seem to be any from the original.
Yeah, and even I think shadows as well appear to be upgraded in resolution. Hard to tell from this range because everything's so drawn back, and it's not like the original GameCube and Wii release really suffered in this area. But yeah, on the whole, they've kind of rejigged it as best they can. Another area that I haven't seen it so far, we're only allowed to show this train sequence in our coverage. to
Right,
date.
okay, yeah. Yeah, just to be clear, we've got this embargo with Capcom where we can't really show anything beyond the training centre.
Yeah, so we've
Yeah.
pretty much played up to the train, through this train sequence.
Yeah.
We're getting pre-rendered backdrops, and well, with the original Resident Evil remake, we had 3D environments.
Yeah, some of them were kind of a complete overhaul, weren't they?
Yeah, I mean they had to incorporate the new lighting system they had, but here we're kind of stuck with the pre-rendered backdrops, and we've not seen any evidence yet, at least, of something a bit more.
So when it comes to doing Xbox One, PS4 and PC, I guess we'll be looking beyond this particular sequence,
Yeah, hopefully
seeing whether we can find some extra stuff.
Yeah.
That would be quite interesting to see.
Yeah, I mean, there are areas where you can see work has been done, in terms of the 3D stuff. The character models are obviously more nuanced in terms of the detailing. There's more scars and wrinkles and that sort of thing, which, you'd expect.
Are the
in this
models the
generation.
same? The actual characters, have they been...
Oh, they're fully updated, yeah.
Right, okay.
If you look up close, yeah.
So when we do the close-ups of the characters there, you do actually see much more detail compared to the original.
Yeah, definitely. And it also applies to, the bits in between rooms.
Okay, those sort of transition like this one, the transition sequence. Those are all polygons, aren't they?
Yeah, those are polygonal, so it does help. And it's interesting, they've kind of gone through this whole game with a fine-tooth comb. They've overhauled the menus. As you can see there, they're much cleaner and better fitting of 1080p presentation. But another thing we found was quite funny is they've changed the sort of text in some places that, where it didn't quite make sense.
Right, okay.
So in this case, you get plural changed to singular when she's looking at the eggs. And stuff like that just shows Capcom have really gone through and made sure it's kind of...
Sort of dotted the I's and crosses the T's, really.
Yeah. Yeah, the only other thing I can really think of that they've changed from looking at this comparison is effects work.
Okay.
It's a bit later on in the clip, but after the first boss on this train sequence, there's a new fire alpha transparency effects that they use on the side, and wherever they could, they have gone in and sort of rejigged it. But, the GameCube original assets were already pretty good, and it's clear they
Well, that's my question, really. When you look at the background animations, I mean, do the original assets have the required detail? I mean, if we look at this bit, it actually looks far more embellished.
Yeah, it does. I mean, in the original Resident Evil Remake PS4, they said, the directors quoted saying, they went by scene through the game, adjusting whatever needed to be, so there are varying levels of quality between certain areas, and if it looked off, then they made the effort. But I've got to say, in this Zero remaster on PS4, it's more consistent across the board. In last year's game, some scenes still looked a bit rough, but from this train sequence, it looks pretty darn good. I mean, there's not much to really complain about in terms of the sort of richness and the sharpness of these backdrops. So yeah, it looks quite well done.
So yeah, one of the things about the last remaster, the original Resident Evil on the consoles, was that it only ran at 30 FPS.
Yeah.
Is that the same for this one?
Yeah, that's the case, yeah. Unfortunately, it's kind of, it's not really a big deal in this sort of
it's a slow-paced game, yeah, so it doesn't really make a massive impact. But I suppose it'll be curious to see whether it will be 60 on the PC like it was last time.
I reckon it will be. I think it's
we'll be checking that out. We actually do have all versions of the game in-house now, but we've only had the chance to check out the PS4 version so far.
Oh, yeah, you can see right there they've really gone to town on her face.
Yeah.
It's kind of quite remarkable. And the shadows as well, they're dropping in a sort of different place.
I think what's sort of curious from my perspective is that they can still use what I guess would be like hand-drawn original assets and still like relight them and extract more detail from them.
Yeah, I mean, back in the day, they clearly had a kind of 3D logic behind these 2D assets.
Right, okay.
So the light points would react as they would in a 3D game, and it's just far less computationally expensive to do it this way back then. And I'm glad they've gone with this route, preserving as much of the original style as they could, rather than just going in and redoing it all in 3D.
So this is an example of those cutscenes you were talking about, right? Where it's letterboxed in 4:3 on the
Yes.
on the original version, and it's just full screen on PS4. Is there actually, again, are there any quality issues with those FMVs on the PS4 at this point, or?
I think it's using the same assets before. It's just about the encoding quality. In last year's Resident Evil PS4 remaster, you had medium-high level encode, but on PC it was an even higher level, higher bit rate.
Okay, right.
So I mean, it's not a huge difference, but for the die-hard fan, that's probably the one.
So it's quite an interesting effect here, where the smoke and the light from that fire is reflecting from that table on the PS4, but there's not really so much going on the Wii.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of, I'd say it's a pretty major upgrade to lighting, character models, detail, I think, as well. It seems that they've really put a lot of effort in there. FMVs, I'm not quite sure. I guess we'd have to have a closer look at it.
Not much of a huge boost there. I mean,
they would have pre-rendered those back in the day anyway. They wouldn't have been worried about real-time render budgets.
I think this really speaks to the determination to archive all their assets as they made them back in the day. I mean, this was made in 2002. Clearly, couldn't have gone through and done all this over. I mean, they had to work with what they had.
Mm-hmm.
It looks fine. It looks. I mean, it's seamless. The transitions from gameplay to FMV. And I'm kind of happy with how it's turned out, to be honest. More so than last year's. It holds up. It really does.
Mm-hmm. What do you mean more so than last year?
Well, there was a variable quality of all the areas.
Do you think there's just generally more consistency in this particular version?
Yeah, I think it just looks... There's no rough points so far anyway. I haven't seen anything that looks kind of... Bear in mind also that Resident Evil 0 was a more ambitious game, I think anyway, than the Resident Evil remake on GameCube. Back in the day, this had some incredible sort of animated pre-rendered backdrops, like when you get up to the train and you're running across the top of the train. There's all this rain coming down and it looks incredible. Even back in the day, it looked,
So they just basically were more ambitious in the scope of what they were trying to do.
Yeah, and it translates. There's the
That's
fire
the table
effect
from the other view, yeah.
and the shadow, the chandeliers as well. Clearly
they've clearly gone through this on a sort of scene-by-scene basis and made quite some substantial alterations. It's really impressive.
But I think the key is that they haven't changed the style of it. They haven't really...
Yeah, it's authentic.
Yeah, I think authentic's the best word for it. This is... that's a nice ladder. Look at that. You don't get that anymore. Yeah, this is the scene I'm talking about. That looks superb even today.
Impressive stuff.
Anyway, I guess that's about it. We've covered all the bases, ticked all the boxes.
Yeah.
Right, well, thanks for listening and watching, I suppose.
Yeah, and we'll be back with full comparisons of all of the remastered versions as soon as we're allowed to show them.
Yep. Until next time, thanks for watching.
Cheers. Bye-bye.